Hello and welcome to another K6 Office Hours. As always, I'm Nicole van der Hoeven, and today I've got two people. You may recognize them both. Tom, would you like to reintroduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name's Tom, and I'm on the professional services team at K6.
And I think we've had you on for three episodes now. Is that right?
Not my first rodeo, he would say.
Yeah. I think we had you on for the proxy one and more recently for the Hasura one, the
Oh, yes,
GraphQL
of
one
course.
that we
Yes.
had. Yeah.
Yep.
And Leandro is also here. Leandro, you want to introduce yourself?
Hola, amigos.
Or should I say Señor
Very,
Performo?
señor, por favor. No, it's okay.
Señor Performo. No
Yeah,
es en
hello,
español,
everybody.
lo siento.
Sí, muy bueno. Hello, it's a pleasure to be back here. And yeah, I am Leandro, also known as Señor Performo for the ones that do not know me. If you don't, I am a manager for a performance testing area at Qualitas Group. I am Señor Performo. I am the host of Pervites Español. I do some YouTube videos, I do some blogging and some other things, and I write performance books. Yay, I'm going to talk a little about that. But that's me. Hello, everybody, and welcome to these hours of knowledge.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about your book already because it's a very big accomplishment and a few people on the K6 team have already bought it, myself included.
Oh, yeah. I really appreciate. Thank you. And I just stuck my foot in my mouth, but let's go with it. And I'm happy to talk about it. Yeah, as you mentioned, it was a huge, gargantuan accomplishment. It's not easy to write a book, especially since if you don't have experience, help, or many of those things on your belt. I'm not a writer. I decided to write a book in English where it is not my native language. And it's interesting to make or bring something that in your mind may sound pretty awesome. And when you talk, you may think you're talking correctly. But to figure out that me, Tarzan, speak good hoo-hoo and write not so good hoo-hoo. And that created lots of situations, but finally it is out there. There's a electronic version for whoever likes their Kindles and to read it on any electronic device. I mean, that there's no limitation. I have seen the Kindle app running on weird devices. You wouldn't believe it. And there's a paperback version, and that's what I was coming. Print proof for the upcoming soon, really, really soon, hardcover. Very happy to have this version as well. Let's give some. I love to share this page flipping noise to the audience. It's a beautiful noise. I don't know. I like it, and the smell as well of pages is delightful. But yeah, that's a book will help you on your load testing projects. All the phases, all the steps, all that is needed. Oh wow, thank you, Bill. um, and we'll give you a guideline together with some stories, some very easy, and to establish some rapport with you so that you get some cool examples from daily life on how to pull off a full performance and load testing project. And well, now that I think about it, some of these examples may not be relatable. I'm Mexican. I included lots of chanclas and tacos and things like that. But maybe you will learn a little bit around that. But pop culture references, lots of fun, lots of explanations, and paired up with the official mumbo jumbo. You will learn also the official terms. It's not all fun and games, but there's some
There's my
yay
copy.
in
But
color
I
digital
have the
copy.
digital version. But then it's
Awesome.
like more, easier to take. It's more portable.
Yeah, Yeah, it has those advantages. I mean, if you have it on your mobile and you're just sitting in a line in a queue or in the subway, you just can pretty much bring it up and start reading. But I know who prefers the feel of pages in their hands. We have all the options. So I hope you
So I
enjoy
don't know
it.
if you mentioned, did you mention the title?
Oh, so
It's
sorry.
The
Yeah, I'm just looking.
Hitchhiking
There's a
Guide to
book, a
Load
mysterious
Testing
book. Yeah.
Projects.
It's the Hitchhiking Guide to Load Testing Projects, a fun step-by-step walkthrough guide that will help you and guide you through all your load testing projects. And as I mentioned, it's like a story, and will give you phase by phase, level by level, world by world. It is based on a video game structure, so that you can move level to level and have all the items at the end of each level, so that you can move to the next one and kill or slay the next dragon, automate the next load test. Um, PTBR translator.
Fernando, yeah, Portuguese, the Brazilian Portuguese
Oh,
translator.
oh, and
Well, there you
now
go.
e falo um pouco de português, aber, aber, I'm mixing
Aber
languages now.
nein, das ist Deutsch.
uh, ma, ni, oh my, yeah, I cannot
Mars
remember.
Dutch.
Yeah, I'm trying to just pull
Yeah, we're
German, but
getting
not
confused
Portuguese.
now.
Ma eu falo
Yeah.
um pouco.
Actually,
Not yet. Later, we will get one. Hopefully, we will be able to translate it into many languages. But uh, patience, Padawan. Talking to myself little by little.
Tom speaks Dutch as well, actually, or Flemish, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. And I just bought your book.
Awesome. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
great. There
Everybody
you
who's watching
go.
us, you're welcome. um, no, I thank you. And if anyone is interested, you can go to Caipirinha. Ah, sí. Caipirinha, uma cerveja, that as well. Suco de abacaxi. I remember all of those things. Important.
It's funny, I can't speak it, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Anyway,
this
before
performance
we
thing.
get
We're
carried
having too much
away.
fun.
Yeah. Before we get carried away talking languages, we are here to talk about thresholds and different names for them in testing, because I guess in general, what we could kind of classify, we could kind of call the more general term for it criteria, right? Because one of the most fundamental things about testing is that you have criteria to test against, because otherwise you don't really know whether something has passed or failed. Do either of you think of can you think of anything that any differences between, traditional functional testing and, performance testing or operational testing in terms
Yeah,
of different criteria?
yeah, of course. And I would say the first thing that comes to mind is that difference that you mentioned in between functional and all performance, or I don't like that much that term, but the non-functional ones, where with functional is pass fail. It did what I need. It didn't failed, or yes or no. And in performance, we don't have those results that uh, punctual, and even the results that we have tend to be on ranges, tend to be on numbers rather than thumbs up or thumbs down, and that makes a huge difference. On top of, it's not always a good or bad. It's very context sensitive. It depends a lot on what is the situation, what is your server, where there are so many variables that most of the time is very difficult to say yes, no, good or bad. It's okay. It may be getting risky. You may be having problems, or you're on fire. Some of those things are kind of the results for thresholds that we can give in performance, but there are so many complications around them, I would say, to provide a cookie cutter assessment, which I think other types of testing have that easy thumbs up, thumbs down, test passed or failed, which I don't know. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, you're right. I think it's pretty obvious when you run K6 that with a functional test, if there's any kind of error whatsoever, then you get a non-zero exit code back, which is what tools, CI/CD tools use to determine the pass or fail. But in K6, it's actually rather challenging to get that non-zero status code. Your test can be seeing all sorts of failures, but K6 itself will still think that it was a success, and that kind of shows how we feel about it. Running a test and getting errors is still a successful test, but it might not be successful in your eyes, and that's really why you need to define thresholds to tell the tool, hey, this is actually not acceptable. But one person's acceptable is not going to be another's, so it's very, very difficult to come up with sort of like a generalized set of SLAs or SLIs or whatever you want to call them.
And that did you mention brings to mind another element where, for us, if a test completes, if a test fails or crashes, it's not necessarily a failure of our test. Probably it crashed because we brought the system down to its knees and we started to just notice a bunch of errors. But it's, from our perspective, a perfectly good and passed test because that was the goal of the test, to fail the system or to find the breaking point, where any other test automation practice would consider that as a failed test. And even some projects are like, but why are you trying to finish your performance test if the system didn't pass? Well, my test passed and finished. Your system didn't. That's a complete different topic.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, that's an interesting distinction because whether a test passes, whether the end result is a pass or a fail, that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with how your test was created. So like if a test passes, meaning the application by whatever definition of your requirements you've set has passed the test, that could still mean that it was an invalid test because maybe you weren't testing the right thing or you didn't have enough checks to make sure that the responses were as expected. So there's a different, I think it is important to distinguish between, testing your test script and testing the actual application.
Yeah. The
So I
pass and
think,
fail of your tests, their goal and completion, like your tests are fine, because I have heard this in many other areas. It's like, no, but we have not completed our work until all of our tests pass. No, your tests goal is to test the system. If they pass or fail, as long as what is their output is good, that means that they completed their tasks, their duties. The other thing is that, well, some things were broken. It's not the test's fault. Don't blame it on the QA people always, but it has to be fixed. That has to be repeated afterwards.
so one of the most common criteria for any sort of testing is a requirement. And for me, this was the very first type of criteria that I was accustomed to. But I feel like it's slightly less utilized these days. What has been your experience on that? Do you still have formal non-functional requirements in your projects for both of you?
I'll let Tom go because I
Yeah.
haven't allowed him to speak too much.
Oh no, don't worry about it. Yeah, so it's funny actually. I'm glad you mentioned this because as in effect, I'm an external consultant when I'm providing professional services to our customers. So quite often I'm not even clued in on what SLAs might actually exist because the SLA will be between the company wanting to do the testing and the vendor that's providing the service, whatever that might be. And so I'm that third party that's essentially validating the system, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm told what the SLAs are. So I actually rarely find myself using thresholds. So in these situations, my job is really just to say, to provide the raw data and point out the worst performers. That's usually something I do, and also keep checking the error rate is something I do quite frequently as well, because one of the more common SLAs that I see thrown around is less than 1% error rate, that being acceptable. And so I'll make sure to do the calculation for each endpoint to show what the error rate was for a given HTTP request response. But ultimately, it's down to someone else to decide whether or not it's acceptable. I just have to give them all of the data, basically.
Yeah, and I would add up to that on my side. Most of the times when we get these requests, the biggest SL or requirement or indicator for us is like, hey, we need to get to production. Please help us to get that as soon as fast as possible, regardless. And when we ask for any threshold or indication for what is good, what is bad, often we get, I don't know, you're the performance expert, you tell me. And that makes it also a little bit interesting because as well, yeah, I'm the expert, but you are the one that has the system and knows it better and knows what is critical, what is not. I need you to tell me. And that is something that together with load tests, testing in general, or defining these requirements for specifically for performance, because it's understandable. Many people do not have the expertise that we have. That's why they are calling us, and they have no idea what may be good or bad or what to pay attention to. We need to guide them, but it's not. And I always tell them, this is not like dry cleaning that you drop the stuff and you come some days back and we're done with it without you providing anything but the system. This is more like a dentist visit. You'll be here with us all the time. You'll cooperate. You'll open the mouth and try to answer when we're asking you questions and establishing conversation, even if we're working in your mouth. So it's important to have those inputs from the clients, and it's hard. You always have to be back and forth and check for what is important, even if they don't know.
Fernando says, one of the things I'm working on right now for API testing is to have like a baseline metric, like a ping or a request to a health check endpoint, and have it on the metrics as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I guess in this case, it could be an example of a requirement on that would be to let's say that the baseline metric that you're looking at is an availability one, so you could have a requirement or an SLO, depending on the terminology that you use, that your application is responds with an HTTP 200 90% of the time or 99% of the time, or something like that. But I think that that's one of the problems, right, with criteria. There's so many different names for it. I listed them. There's requirement, threshold, checks, SLOs, SLAs, SLIs, budgets. How do we make sense of all of these things?
Yeah, and as it was mentioned very well, the process becomes different, because if he has this ping that generates that baseline, it's good to have because I have a comparison. Sometimes you do not have it. Sometimes it's just a single load test and no one else knows that ping. You have to define it. And from these previous experiments and from total ignorance, because you are just thrown at a new system, you have to come up with all these, as you mentioned, Nicole, requirements, thresholds, what is the SLO, SLAs, and all those new SLs that we are hearing about lately, which are starting to become like the norm and standards for our tests, which I can tell when I started in my days when we were using all those old tools, um, we just had that vague definition of an SLA, which applied to everything, I would say. And it's good that we are getting into more detailed definitions, but I think, yeah, we should describe them a little bit better, right?
Yeah, I guess that's what SLIs are intended for. And so the SLA is a service level agreement. That's sort of like the overarching, agreement between two parties. And then within that, there's SLO as well. I'm not quite sure on that one, but SLI is a service level indicator, and that one tends to be more specific to a particular endpoint, um, at least from the brief reading I did about it.
Service level indicator, service
Mhm.
level objective, and service level
Objective.
agreement. Those are the three SLs that we have until someone comes with new ones. But um, and yeah, we can start describing them a little bit, defining how do they apply to. Um, I think the main ones are thresholds and checks, where we need to see if through them we comply with their requirement, which is the main characteristics that we need to have, that some sort of pass and fail criteria that is very wide and kind of difficult to establish just as a one or a no uh, aspect, don't you think?
Mhm.
I think the whole the three SLs, I think that has started to go into performance testing since the field, the industry has been heavily influenced by site reliability engineering, because I think that those SLs have really come from SRE practices. And now performance testing and SRE is kind of overlapping, and now we're seeing that mix, that overlapping in terms as well. What's funny is I think out of the three SLAs, SLOs, and SLIs, I don't think SLIs is actually, I would not consider it criteria, because the way that I think of SLIs is that's the current reading of the metric. It doesn't really say that it should be a certain metric, a certain value or anything. That's just an indication of how the system is performing right now.
Mm.
The next level to that is SLOs, right? Which does have more of a goal. Would you agree with me, Leandro?
Yeah, I do believe the SLIs do not have any judgment attached to them, although they are also peculiar and weird on their own ways, because, as you very well mentioned, they are just a measurement. But like, what is the threshold, the rule that you are using to measure them, will vary a little bit, because some say, like, yeah, my CPU is 90%, there's your SLI. Well, is that a punctual SLI? Is it an average over a period of time? Is it like the maximum volume, the minimum? So your SLIs will have also multiple
Mm-hmm.
modifiers that you could be having like 10 different SLIs about the same item, like about the CPU. Okay, one of these is just at 3 a.m. This one is just at 4 a.m. This one is an average. This one is a maximum, 90 percentiles. All those crazy mixes that we can have um, will define a little bit the SLIs, but no judgment. It is what it is. So here it is. You have it. And you're right, Nicole. I think the biggest judgmentals here are the SLOs, are the ones that are saying um, yay or nay, as I say. Um, I hadn't thought of that, and that's an interesting realization. Very good to bring it up.
And then also to talk about the difference between SLOs and SLAs. An SLA is a service level agreement, and that's usually between a company and their customers. And sometimes there are services that your application, third party services that your application uses, and it might not always be wise to include that those services in your load tests. And for those situations, because those third-party services understand that you still need some sort of assurance, they will give you an SLA, which is a contract basically of this is the uptime that you can expect for our services, or sometimes it could have something about the response time depending on what it is. But I think that it's important to realize that SLOs are separate because they have a different focus, right? SLAs are like the public facing one, or the external contractual legal obligations. SLOs are sometimes stricter than SLAs because the company might want to hold themselves to a higher standard. I think that that's probably safer, actually, right?
Of what I understand of them and how I generally think of them or define, the SLAs are, as you mentioned, agreements, just like a mutual contract. Hey, Nicole, you and I, we agree that the system will be up all this time and the users will have a good experience. They are more generic in some terms. They don't get around too many specifics. Few of them do, like what you mentioned, 99.9% of the time they'll be up. That's a very easy rate, but customer satisfaction, that will be enjoyable. Generally, our characteristics very open to interpretation, but this interpretation gets better defined through the SLOs. A single SLA can have multiple SLOs inside of them. So what does it incur that the customer satisfaction that they can quickly process a purchase in our platform? Well, the purchase should not take more than 3 seconds when we click submit or buy, or that it doesn't generate too many postbacks, that it contacts the bank service quickly and it comes back with these type of things. So those SLOs will all together, as an example, going back to the uptime, we may have SLO saying, hey, the CPU should not reach more than this percentage. Otherwise, we may be risking that uptime. So we need to keep it under. The responses, we should not have that many HTTP requests saying 500 or 400s, so that we can validate that SLA is being complied with through multiple SLOs. So that's how I think it. SLA is the mamas or papas. The smaller are the SLOs, and SLOs depend on multiple SLIs. So big ones and smaller ones, many more. Smaller ones, way even more. I don't know. Probably I confused the audience a little bit more with that.
Well, let me show a practical example. Maybe it'll help a little bit. I want to show what it looks like in K6. And Leandro's actually already made a video on this exactly, a two-part video, in fact, and I've linked it in the chat. But so this is a K6 script, and I won't go into all of the details, but I just wanted to call out this part because that's where I define the thresholds. So I have 4 different ones here, and there are a bunch of them that you can look up in our documentation. But the ones that I've got are one for the error rate. And here I'm saying that I want the error rate to be less than or equal to 5%, which is a little bit higher than normal, but there are issues with this one that I already know about. And then for these two, this is really interesting because I run this script on the cloud, and because they're running on load generators that K6 provisions for me, then I'm also able to use as thresholds the CPU and memory utilization of the load generator. So not just the application servers, it's not just the server side that needs to have these thresholds. I think it's also important to have them for the load generation. And then this one is for the response time. In this case, I'm saying that I want the 95th percentile response time to be less than or equal to 5 seconds or 5,000 milliseconds. Do you, Tom, or Leandro as well, what do you think, what kind of counterpart would this be? Would you call K6 thresholds SLAs, SLOs, SLIs? What would you say?
So I guess these are really SLOs then, right? If we're going by the earlier definition. And so when K6 runs through these thresholds, I think the default behavior is that if any one of them fail, we will send back a non-zero status code, which, you know, we can technically describe as failing the overall SLA at that point, if we're thinking about it in those terms.
Would you agree with that
Yeah,
as well, Leandro?
on my end, I believe I think that the thresholds that we use in K6 are components of SLOs, because we can have a service level objective that requires multiple thresholds to be valid or invalid. If we are, again, I don't know, talking about RAM, that the consumption is not this high, and there would be only one threshold for that SLO. But as an example with others where we may want, I cannot think, let's say the CPU, we don't want it too low because that may mean that the service is down, or too high, it may mean that the won't have enough to work with. So we may have two thresholds, one that is higher, that one is lower, and we needed to stay in between those. And possibly, I think we could even mix them, have another threshold that as well, for this SLO to be passed, there should not be any HTTP 500 responses on this, none at all. So we have multiple thresholds in an SLO. I would think that would be because the thresholds, and this is my personal opinion, they apply on SLIs. You are applying a threshold to an SLI to make an SLO, a component of an SLO validation. Sounds like a mouthful of words, but that's more or less how I think it.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's kind of like the way I think of it as well is that thresholds are the K6's implementation of SLOs, and there might be more than one threshold. So it's not, I guess it's not an exact one-to-one thing, but it is how to implement them. But let me switch to this because I also wanted to show it on K6 Cloud. Zoom in a little bit. All right, so when we create a test, so there's a thresholds tab here. Oh, now I have to zoom out a little bit. Okay, so this is the same thing that I had in my script. It's just that this is you're doing it on the UI, and there's a whole bunch of things here. So we're talking about CPU utilization, right? So you can select different ones here. So this is like the positive way. So you would want your CPU utilization to be maybe less than or equal to like 80% is a pretty standard one. And I think this is where thresholds can have a bit more of a practical application, because with K6 it will actually let you stop the test if this is not true. And I think not everyone, not all of the load testing tools that I'm aware of do that. In fact, I kind of think that, I mean, it's okay to discuss other tools here too, by the way, Leandro, but I do, JMeter comes to mind because there is no easy way to apply thresholds to a test. Pretty much you have to wrap it, you have to use some sort of wrapper or like a platform that does that for you.
Yeah, and you got me thinking there, because yes, you can pull it off, but I would say it's not a functionality like right out of the box and that you can
Yeah.
easily implement, which is a double-edged sword at times. At times, you may want just pieces of the test to stop, which is good to have that sort of control that is provided, but you may not want the whole thing to fail. And as I said, it's very context sensitive. You may have a test where at the moment that you get the first 500 error, um, okay, that's it, we're done, get out of there. Or on other occasions, say, it's fine, you all can keep running, I'll check this little bugger that started to generate issues, but the test overall is fine. We are not failing any of our thresholds. But that's where I think is a very good dependency on being able to define those. Where can you implement these functionalities, stop if needed, or stop
Yeah.
pieces? And as you mentioned, I can think of some ways to do it on other tools, but none that straightforward. I mean, old ones. I remember the on error, stop everything on error, and you just. But you had to program the threshold, create instruction, and then throw the error so that everything would stop. Um, yeah, I think that's an advantage to have them right out of the box.
Yeah, I know JMeter has it on an individual request level. Like if there's an error, then stop and go to the next iteration kind of thing. But I know the way that I've implemented this is by using CI/CD tools like Jenkins or something like that. So I needed an extra service to wrap it up. Otherwise, you could probably do this in Groovy or Bean Shell, but then you're writing the actual code for it. JMeter's a little bit quirky, though. I think most other testing tools like Gatling does this, LoadRunner does this. I don't know about Eggplant actually, Tom. You'd probably know better.
Yeah, Eggplant Performance, I believe had that kind of functionality as well. You could definitely define um, SLAs within the tool itself, within the UI. Whether or not you could have your test fail as soon as the SLA was breached, or any one of the SLOs within the SLA was breached, I don't know. So that little abort on test, abort on fail, is it? Abort test
Hmm.
on fail flag. That's actually quite a
Yeah,
useful one. Yeah.
yeah.
And speaking of, we are actually adding another one, which will hopefully come out soon, the ability to abort a test from any particular virtual user. So if you really wanted to customize that even further in code, that's something that'll soon be possible as well.
And I would
Awesome.
say that will depend a little bit as well on what type of test are you doing. If you're part of a small test for a single component, a single API in a CI/CD process, yeah, if you start to see some critical thresholds to go haywire, stop everything, go back. Hey, Mr. Developer, you cannot check in this code, and the CI/CD is on fire right now, thanks to you. So please fix it. But if it is a big load test with multiple processes, multiple APIs, or automations running in the same one, that's where, as I was saying
Hmm.
earlier, you may want to control it better. Of just stop a little one and the rest keep them running. Do not pay attention to this
Yeah,
little problem. Uh, it will be very dependent on the type of tests that you're running.
yeah. Well, let me show you as well this relatively new feature. Oops. Yes. So now we have, I think when you made your video, Leandro, we didn't have this yet, but now we have a thresholds page which lists all the thresholds, and it does it for all projects, but you can select the ones that you do want to include, and then it's just a nice easy way of seeing which ones are failing. And I really like this idea because it brings the focus to like what is your criteria? Why are you testing? And do you even have thresholds? I mean, maybe if there are a lot of scripts and they don't even appear here, To me, that's also a warning sign because you're not checking for anything. You've not stated your objectives. So I think it's a good practice to get into, to have this page and regularly look at what's happening across your organization or your account. So there's so much here that you can look at. So the ones where they have different bars, that's each bar is an execution of that script.
And I would say it's not necessarily a bad thing that you don't have any threshold. Maybe your organization just needs to constantly generate load, or as it was mentioned in the chat, that you are pinging something. You don't care what is the response, what happens. You just need to ping it, trigger it here and there. But at some other points, of course, at least to know it is alive, have a threshold for don't give me an error or timeout or anything like that. Otherwise, then I will have to trigger some other processes. But it and the number and type of thresholds, even if it's a performance test or script, will be very, very different depending on what you're doing. What you showed, there were several thresholds because you may have a huge test that has to run for hours and you keep generating and generating. And some others, like,
Yeah.
no, I'm just running a quick 5-thread execution, 10 iterations, really, really quick. It's just for check-ins. 3 thresholds is the only thing that I care. And another thing that I like a lot is that you can configure those thresholds to maybe even be pulled off from elsewhere. And I keep coming back to that mention in the chat that you have that constant ping. You have in your I don't know, in your influx or in Prometheus, and you have that average of how long is it taking. And from there, you pull it and you create a threshold automatically so that you don't have that much deviation from the previous one. There's all sort of crazy things that you can have fun with them.
I think that you should always have some sort of criteria, whether that's like a formally defined threshold like this, or it could be a check, because I think that a check is also a type of criteria. It's just more lower level. So I think at the very base, like you were talking about, like maybe you don't need to have a response time threshold, and that's true, but then maybe you need an error rate. So like this one is the HTTP rec failed. I mean, you still need to know that your script is doing the right thing, right?
And as you mentioned, probably a check, just is the service up? Are we getting a
Yeah.
response? Is it at 200? Some of those little ones that no no case of putting and that's another thing that you got me thinking. Probably I would put some checks on that before we get into the thresholds, because then
Yeah.
there's not even any point of getting to the threshold validation. It makes me think
Yeah.
a little bit of this web performance where you have the CSS at the bottom, and we would put those validations at the bottom of the script. No, no, no. Check first if the service is alive, and then we will go with the thresholds. I don't know. Going crazy here.
No, I agree with that. It's lower level, so this is, I think checks are the most low level form of criteria. So we kind of went from the highest level, which is requirements and SLAs. I kind of put those on the same level, but just with different audiences. And then there's SLOs, and a related concept is thresholds, which is the implementation. And then to the bottom, towards the bottom now, we've got checks. So like here, I'm making a request, but then I'm also checking the response. I'm checking whether it's an HTTP 200 that's returned, and I'm specifically looking for in this case, the name of a Pokemon that must appear in the response body.
Your
Now I know
title, a
you,
header, or something.
yeah. Now I know you definitely do use this a lot, right, Tom?
Yeah, yeah. I primarily use checks over thresholds. Yeah, just that simple. True or false assert. So yeah, I was actually just googling, threshold versus checks K6 just to see what we say about it. And yeah,
Yeah.
on the thresholds article, we say checks are nice for codifying assertions, but unlike thresholds, checks will not affect the exit status of K6. So there you go.
Yeah. So sometimes it could be useful to have thresholds on checks, like to make sure that
Yeah,
to kind of look at the failures, whether checks have failed.
yeah, that was actually what I
By the
was
way,
going
did
to
you
check.
want to show? Did you want to share your screen? You were saying earlier that you had something as well, Tom.
Yeah, it was pretty similar to what you had. I took the thresholds from our documentation and applied them to my K6 cloud test. So I don't think I'd be showing anything particularly new.
But
I
but something that I would bring up is interesting because sounds like the checks are better suited for when I mentioned these scenarios where is the test failing? Is it because of the system is failing, or are those requirements not being passed? Let's say if we're doing a capacity test with K6, I think in that case I would put as much as possible on the checks because we got to a point where yes, we completed the test, it was successful, we made the system fail, we got a bunch of errors, but it's not part of a threshold per se. It's just checking. Is it still alive? No, we killed it. That's good, believe it or not. Or on the other hand, we are just validating and measuring where are the results falling into to make sure that the system is behaving well, not if we are killing it. So yeah, that makes me think on situations where you may totally use one and nest some of them in a way or nest them out backwards in different scenarios.
Yeah, I think checks are also a bit more flexible in the sense that you can evaluate any JavaScript expression with them, whereas with thresholds, I think we predefine the types of thresholds that are possible to create. I think that's also one of the differences there.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's definitely more flexible in that regard. So I also think that this could be useful for maybe non-load test situations. Like, what if you are just checking, like you run a test before, almost like a shakeout, but for test data, for example. So you might not really care whether the users that you're logging in with have previous orders or something, but you could add a check so that you can see how, like, what percentage of your users have already had previous purchases that they have on their account, and then that way use that to validate your test environment's data versus the production data. So that would be a situation in which you could use a check, but you're not necessarily saying that if the person that you account that you logged in with has an order, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It's more like from.
Oh, did we
Oh,
lose
Does
did
that
we?
Nicole?
make sense?
We
I
just
think
lost
you
you
may
for a
have to
second.
Oh,
repeat that. We lost you
am I
for a
back?
few seconds. Seems like you're back now.
Oh no. Okay, that's good. I was like looking at these blank faces and I'm like, does that not make sense? Oh, okay. So what I was saying was sometimes you might have a situation where you're just trying to verify the state of the test data in your environment. So in an e-commerce scenario, for instance, maybe you're not sure whether the user accounts that you're logging into have previous purchases, for example. And maybe you want to make sure that is similar with what's happening in production. So you could have a check where you're checking specifically for does this user have other purchases, but it's not like you want the test to fail if it finds a user. It's not like an error per se. It's more of like an informational thing. So that's kind of a situation where I'm thinking I would use a check rather than the threshold.
Yeah, speaking specifically around data, you just got me thinking. You could do some checks that go over data records until it finds, especially because it's every other day that we performers and load testers have to gather a pool of data that sometimes is not reusable, and you have to go through and check, okay, how much of it have I burned, and from where I have to create new ones. That would be an awesome use, a script that just iterates and looks over the records and checks data integrity, validity, if we have burned it. And it could be through checks that it says, hey, you only have 1,000 out of 1,000,000. You may need to trigger automatically the next one, or even send that code and say, trigger it, automated CI process that generates data for our next load test. So that's a very good use. I like it a lot. I'm already drilling about it.
So Tom, you mentioned earlier that it's tricky to get a non-binary response error code for K6. Could you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, I guess it's really just that the fact that you can encounter all sorts of errors in your test and long response times, but none of it really should translate to a non-zero exit code, because that's what's used in CI/CD pipelines to determine the pass or fail of a given step in that
Oh, I see.
pipeline. Yeah, so the default behavior is to always send back a successful status code, and that then leaves it up to the user to decide what they consider to be a failure when running a load test, and that's the part that's not always straightforward to figure out.
But that is a little around what was being talked. I think it as you can configure those outputs, those codes as and treat your K6 automation as a function. And I'm just thinking crazy things. You can put K6 inside of a Jenkins job that outputs that code, and that's the return from that job that you can use for another decision in your continuous pipeline. I don't know. I mean, that has also lots of potential to, on top of just the 1 and 0 passed and failed, that
Yeah.
will give you lots of possibilities.
It's funny you should mention it, because it came into our support team yesterday. Someone is using K6 for functional testing, and
Oh, wow.
yeah,
Awesome.
and they
I
wanted
pulled a homer.
they wanted K6 to return a non-zero status code as soon as any error happened. And I had to kind of think about that a bit, because I was like, oh, well, yeah, we actually don't do that, because, yeah, errors are sort of expected in a load test. But, there is absolutely no reason why you couldn't use K6 for functional testing. We have an article in our documentation about how to do it. We have a library that Powell, our CTO, I believe, put together, that allows you to write very, I don't know, is it gherkin style? I'm sorry, but I'm not a functional tester, so I'm way over my head in with that. But there's a library where you write very test cases like you would in I think it is gherkin, but anyway, there's possibly a change we can make there to have K6 be in this mode where any kind of error would result in a non-zero status code. So that might be coming soon as well.
And the different output that you mentioned, not only for functional, but with the example for data, I would definitely put a K6 script, as I said, inside of this Jenkins job, and the output not to be just a 1 or a 0, but could be 1,000,000. How many records do I need to trigger in my next step on the pipeline to make sure that my next load test that is also in the pipeline has enough records, that I can send that output as input on the data generation process and linked all together? I mean, aliens.
The possibilities are limitless. Yeah.
Okay, well, to wrap this up, I thought of asking everybody a question that I didn't tell either of you about what is one tool, like a practical tool that you use in your job regularly that helps you. And it doesn't have to be like a testing tool necessarily. Um,
Uh-oh, we
Nicole,
lost her again.
no.
uh-oh.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
it
I
was
don't
an
know
awkward
what's
question.
been
That's
wrong
why.
recently. Did you
you were
get the
asking
question?
what other tools we use in conjunction with K6. Is that it? Well,
Well, not
I'll go.
necessarily in conjunction with K6, but just something that helps you in your daily work life. So not necessarily, it could be a testing tool, but it could just also be something that automates some part of your life.
I get the feeling I know what Nicole's answer is going to be if she's going to ask her, so I'll
I
ask
know
you.
it's so obvious, right?
Well, for me, I think it's pretty
I
obvious
might
as
as
well.
well.
Um,
Yeah.
Go ahead,
For
Nicole.
you?
Yeah. Let's
No,
hear
you
yours
go.
first.
I was gonna go
Okay.
first to give you more time, but if you're ready, you go.
Well, mine's pretty obvious. If you were watching uh, the previous office hours, I'm a big fan of web debug
Fiddler?
proxies. Yep, Fiddler is a wonderful tool. I use it all the time to send all of my HTTP traffic through to generate my HAR files as well. It's very useful when it comes to trying to reverse engineer, uh, you know, HTTP, which is ultimately what we're doing. So it's invaluable to what I do.
Do you
Leandro?
have one, Leandro, or do you want me to
My
go?
turn? Okay. So I think on my end, I'll start. I have three or four. Uh, One of them, I'm gonna go
Wow,
really,
okay.
really, really old school notepad with tabs. I know OneNote may be awesome and all those solutions, but at times I need to have pencil and to be able to write on it, and I carry it all over the place because it's easier. Eventually, they end up being translated into digital, adds up steps, but it feels to me faster just uh, to do some doodles, and those are my notes. Believe it or not, some notes are just happy faces or uh, old style emoticons. The other one I would say big time productivity wise or for knowing what I have to do day by day is a to-do list. I am a big sucker for those things. And the next one, and this is funny because it's no I'm not trying to look good to anyone, but I use a lot Grafana for several things. I like how they give you visuals on things, even like a count on my to-do pending
Oh, what a
check
suck up.
marks. That it's really useful for me. Believe it or not, I often have a Grafana dashboard with silly things displayed there. And um, the fourth one, I have to agree with you, Tom. Capturing tools. Instead of Fiddler, I would say mine is the network analysis tools for Chrome or the best browser at hand. I use those a
Mm.
lot, way too much, I would say.
Well, mine
Your turn.
is very obvious to anybody in K6, I think, because I've already given an internal talk talking about how much I love this tool. And in direct contrast to you, Leandro, mine
Will
is
you tell us what it
Obsidian.
is? I'm on the edge of my seat here. I
It's
don't know.
Obsidian. Obsidian
What a
is
surprise!
life. Obsidian is a note-taking tool, but to say it's a note-taking tool is like it's such an understatement. It calls itself a second brain, and I really like it because it lets me offload everything that I know that I don't need to keep in my RAM, like in my head and I just am able to focus on things that actually matter. And it's like creating your own personal Google, except everything that's there are things that are interesting to you. So no relation at all. It is a free tool. I don't get anything, but I just love talking about it. So I definitely think people should try it out. Obsidian.
Do you want to show us your is it the knowledge graph that shows how all the
Oh,
bits, all your
okay.
notes connect to each other? I thought that was pretty
You will make me
impressive.
take a look on it because
Sure.
in that line, I am a heavy user of Evernote. That one as
Uh,
well helps me writing and keeping notes, pictures, and everything. That, as an example, if you take a picture of a phone number or something that you need to have at hand, when you just leave it in the phone, it just gets lost in the other silly pictures, cat pictures, and other stuff that you have in the phone. But if you have a tag that you can go back to that one, I like that. But I definitely will look at Obsidian. Show us, Nicole, what do you have there?
Yeah, sure. I didn't plan to show people, but sure.
sorry.
Oh, I wasn't
uh,
prepared. I didn't clean up and for visits.
yeah, pretty much. Yeah, but let me zoom in here.
Oh God.
Oops.
Oh wow, what
Yeah,
is
so
that?
this is a visualization of all of my notes. You can see here I
Damn.
have 4,037 files, so I might be a little obsessed and obsessive. It's not just for work either. It is also for play. So actually, the ones that are highlighted are D&D related notes. I told you I didn't really
Cool.
expect to be showing this on office hours, but seriously though, I this is a life-changing tool that is 100% free. And if I could go back in time and give myself, like a younger Nicole, advice, my single best career tip would be to take notes and have a good system for taking notes and remembering them, because notes are worthless if you can't actually make use of them in the future. Anyway,
Wow.
that was my random plug. One last thing is we are hiring. We still have a lot of jobs open if you want to join us. Check out these links below. We have several positions open depending on your experience and what you're looking for. But K6 is a great place to work, and so is Grafana. So check both of those links out, and maybe you can show up here in office hours too. If I can convince you. It's not a requirement. I wish it were. But
Not a
thank you
requirement
so
to be
much,
convinced.
both of you.
Do you
Well,
bring
I
up
know it's
darts
pretty
and
easy to.
just pull them?
No, not really. I don't want to force anybody, but it is fun to have people on here. But thank you for coming, Leandro and Tom as well. Thank you both for coming back and joining me on a Friday evening. Any last words, Leandro? Any you want to plug your stuff?
Always a pleasure, and thanks for having me here. And for the ones seeing us, hearing us, Hitchhiking Guide to Load Testing Projects available in Amazon. Right now, electronic everywhere. Amazon has a page, and paperback, there are some limitations. Hope they can make it to where you are. And coming soon, most probably next week, hardcover if you want a fancy hard, literally thing to so that your papers won't fly away and things like that. Very recommended. And for more things, more learning, please shoot me any question that you may have. LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. Where else am I? Facebook, when Facebook is available.
Everywhere.
Um, because lately we know that has been an issue to get on
Yeah.
Facebook. But
Are you on Twitch as well?
no, I have
He is
to start
now.
learning.
We're
Oh, well,
streaming on
right now, yeah.
Twitch, by the way.
But Yeah, neither TikTok or any of those things. That's too new for my old time. But
Yeah.
yeah, if there are any other questions, anyone wants to reach out or ping me, I'm available in all those social and video networks. And yeah, drop me a note. I hope you like the book. And let's see everyone next time.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you both. But thanks for your attention, and we will see you next week. Have a good weekend, everybody.